All right, folks. All right, here we go. So we're going to be talking today about valley fever and the Delta Tunnel. So what is valley fever? Well, in 1892, a medical student in Buenos Aires named Alejandro Posadas met an Argentinian soldier who was seeking treatment for a dermatological problem. Posadas documented a fungal-like mass on the patient's right cheek. Oh, here's Wes. Give him a moment there because this was his idea. I'm sure he's passionate about it. All right, Wes, if you can hear us, we're just getting started. So you're right on time. And I know that you wanted to hear about this. So here we go. I'll just start over. All right. In 1892, a medical student in Buenos Aires named Alejandro Posadas met an Argentinian soldier who was seeking treatment for a dermatological problem. Posadas documented a fungal-like mass on the patient's right cheek. Over the course of the next 7 years, the soldier experienced worsening skin lesions and fever and eventually died. His story is the first case of disseminated, now bear with me, this is a hard word to say, coccidioidomycosis on record. Around the same time, a manual laborer in the San Joaquin Valley walked into a hospital in San Francisco with skin lesions that looked a lot like the lesions on the Buenos Aires patient. The methods doctors used in San Francisco to treat the patient were barbaric. They cut chunks out of his face and treated the lesions with oil of turpentine, carbolic acid, and they scrubbed his raw skin with bichloride solution. They only succeeded in torturing their patient, and he eventually died. Valley fever, also called coccidioidomycosis, is an infection caused by the fungus Coccidioides. The fungus is known to live in the soil in the southwestern U.S. and parts of Mexico and Central and South America. People can get valley fever by breathing in the microscopic fungal spores from the air, although most people who breathe in the spores don't get sick. Some people who get sick with valley fever will get better on their own within weeks, or some will need antifungal medication. Certain groups of people are at higher risk for becoming severely ill. It's difficult to prevent exposure to coccidioides in areas where it's common in the environment, but people who are at a higher risk for severe valley fever should try to avoid breathing in large amounts of dust if they're in these areas. And if you were wondering, yes, this picture here is valley fever under a petri dish. So I think it's also particularly relevant to note that valley fever is absolutely on the rise, and we'll talk about why, but hint, hint, climate change. And it's risen 800% between 2000 and 2018. Fever, body aches, chills. It could be COVID-19. It could be the flu. But when a patient in the southwestern U.S. develops these symptoms, doctors and nurses also consider the possibility of valley fever. Symptoms of valley fever may appear between 1 and 3 weeks after a person breathes in the fungal spores. 50% of patients have symptoms strong enough to see a doctor, and acute pneumonia is their primary concern. There are no over-the-counter remedies, and patients with strong enough symptoms will receive antifungal medication. In extremely rare cases, the fungal spores can enter the skin through a cut, wound, or splinter and cause a skin infection. The disease contributes to about 200 deaths in the US each year. Sorry, I probably should have warned you before this yucky looking picture. Approximately 5 to 10% of people who get valley fever will develop serious or long-term problems in their lungs. And up to 5% of patients, disseminated disease is very serious, and those sites include the skin, bones, lining of the brain and spinal cord, lymph nodes, spleen, liver, kidneys, or possibly really any part of the body. Spreading to the linings of the brain and spinal cord can cause meningitis. Deaths from this complication have decreased from 100% to around 30% since treatment using amphotericin B was discovered around 50 years ago. So we're getting there. We're coming a long way. So who gets valley fever? A spokesperson for the California Department of Public Health noted that valley fever cases in the state nearly tripled between 2015 and 2019, from around 3,000 cases to 9,000. Valley fever can affect people of any age, but it's most common in adults aged 60 and older. Certain groups of people may be at higher risk for developing the severe forms of valley fever. People who live, work, or travel in areas with high rates of valley fever may be at a higher risk of getting infected than others, especially if they participate in outdoor activities that involve close contact to dirt or dust, including yard work, gardening, and digging. If they live or work near areas where dirt and soil are stirred up, such as construction or excavation sites, or if they work in jobs where dirt and soil are stirred up or disturbed, including construction, farming, military work, and archaeology. Pets, particularly dogs, can get valley fever, but it is not contagious between animals and people. Valley fever in dogs or other animals is similar to valley fever in humans. Like humans, many dogs that are exposed to valley fever never get sick, but dogs that do develop symptoms often have symptoms that include coughing, lack of energy, and weight loss. So valley fever can be severe. I will tell you, if you didn't know this already, I lived in Visalia for a number of years. That's near Fresno in the Central Valley. And my former father-in-law had valley fever. It was pretty bad. He was in the hospital for a number of months. And at some point, he lost a tooth to valley fever. But he just stuck it back in there every day. At the end of the day, he'd take that tooth out. And when the next day started, he'd pop it back in. I do not recommend that. It's not sanitary, not healthy. But now we know that's a thing that can happen with valley fever. But I've got another story to share with you, the story of poor Jesse Merrick. So Jesse Merrick left his family home in Ventura after the Thomas fire, and he went to work in Alabama covering football. He was a reporter. He said, "I felt like I had gotten hit by a bus." Jesse chalked it up to jet lag and pushed through with the broadcast. But his symptoms didn't subside. Instead, they got much, much worse. Within a couple of days, he was coughing and running a low-grade fever. A rash had appeared on his upper torso. "I remember being miserable," he said. "I wasn't sleeping." Once the rash started moving up his neck, about 4 days after he started feeling sick, Jesse knew he had to get to urgent care. That was the first of many doctor's visits. For a month, Jesse's symptoms worsened. Giant welts appeared around his joints, like someone had whacked him all over with a baseball bat. He developed pneumonia, which made everything hurt, even breathing. Walking was painful. It felt like someone was stabbing the bottom of my feet with knives, he said. By the time his primary care discovered a 6-centimeter mass in his lung, Jesse was starting to think that whatever disease he had might actually end up killing him. He was scheduled for a biopsy and a spinal tap, last-ditch efforts to find the source of his illness. But on the morning of the procedures, a team of infectious disease specialists appeared in his hospital room. "It was like I was on an episode of House or something," he said. The biopsy and the spinal tap were suddenly irrelevant. The specialists were able to give him what his regular doctor couldn't, a diagnosis. The mass in his lung wasn't cancer, it was a fungal ball, a glob of fungal hyphae, or mushroom filaments and mucus. The infectious disease specialist started him on an intravenous drip of fluconazole and antifungal medication. "Instantly, I started feeling better," he said. Hope you're not squeamish. Sorry about that. So people can get valley fever by breathing in dust that contains spores of the coccidioides fungus. Like seeds from plants, a fungus grows and spreads from tiny spores that are too small to see. When soil or dirt are stirred up by strong winds or while digging, dust containing these fungal spores can get into the air. Anyone who lives, works, or visits an area with the valley fever fungus grows can breathe in these fungal spores without knowing it and become infected. When doctors do order a valley fever blood test, the results of that test aren't guaranteed to be accurate. 1 in 5 valley fever tests produce a false negative, said Stephen Oshovitz, an infectious disease doctor at Southern Arizona infectious disease specialist. It can be kind of silent and hard to diagnose because our tests just aren't that great, he said. Part of the blame also lies with states and the way their public health departments prioritize diseases. Lawrence Murrells, an infectious disease specialist in San Jose, California, who is affiliated with the California Institute for Medical Research, said that valley fever has long languished behind HIV, West Nile virus, typhoid fever, tuberculosis, and other communicable or vector-borne diseases in states' list of public health priorities. That's despite the fact that the disease's morbidity rate in the regions where it is endemic is comparable to polio, measles, and chickenpox before those diseases were stymied by vaccines. So most of the Bay Delta region is, I'll show you right here, most of the Bay Delta region is in the mid-range for exposure, but it's just north of the most affected areas. It's very difficult to avoid breathing in the fungus coccidioides in areas where it's common in the environment. People who live in these areas can try to avoid spending time in dusty places as much as possible with the suggestions on this slide. But the thing is, with drought here to stay and with 16 years of construction in the Delta Tunnel, this is a near impossible ask for Delta communities, and especially farm workers working some of the many local wine, grape, and pear orchards in the Delta. Many farm workers are not provided health insurance. They might be undocumented and they cannot access Medi-Cal, although as of this week, there is a new law that may allow for undocumented seniors to receive Medi-Cal. But up until now, and until that is enacted, and for everyone who's not yet a senior, this is still a very real reality. And thus they've got less access to healthcare, which is particularly unfortunate when this disease is often misdiagnosed and it requires multiple doctor visits and testing. All right, I hope this little video works for us. Morgan Goris, an Earth system scientist at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, decided to investigate an important question. What makes a place hospitable to cocci? She soon discovered that the fungus thrives in a set of specific conditions. U.S. counties that are endemic to valley fever have an average annual temperature above 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and they get under 600 millimeters of rain a year. But then Goris took her analysis a step further. She decided to look at what would happen in valley fever under a high emissions climate change scenario. In other words, whether the disease would spread if humans continued emitting greenhouse gases, business as usual. Once I did that, I found that by the end of the 21st century, much of the Western US could become endemic to valley fever. Our endemic area could expand as far north as the US-Canada border. So here's a little graphic of what she came up with. So we can see that by the end of the century, do that again. By the end of the century, we're reaching the northern border alongside Canada, and it's a good western half of the country. The connection between climate changes and valley fever is a bit clearer. Researchers speculate that a pattern of intense drought followed by intense rain may be driving the rise in valley fever cases. When there's a prolonged drought, the fungus in the soil tends to dry up and die, but no drought goes on forever, at least not in most parts of the US. So when the rains eventually come back, the fungus flourishes. Then when the next drought hits and the soils and fungus dry out again, it is easy for wind or a firefighter's shovel or a hiker's boot to disturb and disseminate the abundant rain-spurred spores. There's also a massive economic burden associated with the potential expansion of valley fever into newer areas. Goris conducted a separate analysis based on future warming scenarios and found that by the end of the century, the average total annual cost of valley fever infections could rise to $18.5 billion per year, which is up from around $3.9 billion today on treatment. I'm just going to ask that everyone make sure they muted themselves. I can hear somebody. Oh, there we go. So if you're just learning about the Delta Tunnel, if you're newer to joining us here, quickly, the Delta Tunnel is an environmentally destructive project that will divert millions of gallons of water away from the Bay Delta to agricultural and municipal districts further south in the Central Valley and Southern California. The Bay Delta is already hurt by runoff, loss of land, loss of species, and huge losses of fresh water. It is home to many endangered species, including wild salmon, who marine mammals and people alike rely on as a food source. Salmon are a sacred and integral part of the economy for many Northern California tribes. So how does a Delta Tunnel connect to valley fever? Well, the amount of fresh water flowing through the Delta varies from year to year and depends on a number of things. But the current proposed Delta Conveyance flow capacity as of this week is 3,000 to 7,500 CFS or cubic feet per second. And they usually suggest an average of around 6,000 CFS to be used during wet years. We know that Sites Reservoir, the reservoir where they're going to hold a lot of the water when it's not being transported, so kind of a sister project. We know that Sites Reservoir would be used in wet and dry years. The amount of water diverted from the Delta through the Delta Tunnel has yet to be pinned down and would also vary throughout the year and then from year to year. But we know that it will cause freshwater flows to be diverted, and that means some wet riparian areas or areas around rivers will stagnate, and that's going to cause harmful algal blooms, or they'll dry up altogether. We also know that coccidioidomycosis, aka the fungus in valley fever, feeds on moisture, and then it lies dormant in soil. And as the soil dries, it becomes airborne, and then it disseminates. If the Delta Tunnel were built, it would be a prime setup to spread valley fever throughout the region. So Delta Tunnel construction. During construction, hundreds of thousands of tons of tunnel muck, a mixture of soil, water, air, and other chemicals to soften the soil must be removed during tunnel excavation and dumped somewhere. Right now, that somewhere is looking like the islands in the Delta that are owned by Metropolitan Water District. They're probably going to just dump that muck on a couple islands. What we know about the Delta Conveyance project estimates that it would take around 16 years minimum to complete, and that would be construction for 6 days a week at 20 hours per day, and about 10 of those hours are going to be construction on the surface, up where we are, and up where fungal spores are likely to be, so up at the surface. There will be 32 construction projects along any alignment that they choose. I say any alignment because they're looking at 3 different alignments right now: the Central Corridor, East Corridor, and Bethany alignment. But there are going to be 32 construction projects predicted right now. There will be 150 to 175 round trip truck trips to 3 to 4 tunnel intake sites at the peak of construction per day, with 75 round trip truck trips to the tunnel launch site per day and 125 truck trips to retrieval and maintenance sites per day. There will be 64,800 cubic feet of soil excavated daily, which will be stacked on a 240-acre site in the Delta. There will be a total of 1,480,429 cubic yards of discharge into Delta waterways. Any type of soil disturbance, like digging in the dirt or high winds, can cause those tiny spores to become wafted into the air, says Megan Gorish. She's a scientist at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And that's when humans can breathe them in and become sick. So again, we just saw how much construction there's going to be in any kind of soil disturbance that could release spores into the air. Disturbing soil, especially soil that hasn't been touched in a long time in areas that are endemic to cocci, tends to send the dangerous fungal spores swirling into the air and inevitably into people's lungs. Wildland firefighters tend to get valley fever, not necessarily from the flames themselves, but from digging line breaks in the soil to help contain fires. Construction sites are responsible for a huge quantity of valley fever infections for the same reason. So just looking forward, there are three main types of fungi that can cause lung infections in humans in the US, including cocci. Histoplasmosis and blastomycosis they also pose risks to humans. It's possible that the same environmental conditions that may be helping cocci spread into new areas and become more prevalent are also motivating those fungi. Researchers can't say for sure whether that's happening yet, but it's something they're working on. I can't really speak to what those predictions might be, says Bridget Barker, a researcher from Northern Arizona University, but my colleagues have noticed similar trends where there's an increase in reported disease. We know climate change is only getting worse, and our methods of slowing it are not keeping pace with how rapidly things are changing. We can educate ourselves and others on the dangers of airborne transmission of fungal pathogens in the era of climate change. And as it relates to the Delta Tunnel, we can push for early detection and better testing for valley fever and more access to healthcare for farm workers and underserved communities. And we can fight the Delta Tunnel. That's really all we got right now. So with that being said, I know it's looking bleak. Questions, comments? Anything we want to discuss about this?
How did you get those statistics about the Delta Tunnel and stuff like that?
Sure. So I'll share my screen again. The last page here is the my sources and the additional resources, and I will. You know what? This actually I can't copy it that way. I'll send you the slides.
It's okay. I was just wondering, like, how do you know, like, how long it would take to build it, and how many cubic feet of what would be dumped, and like, how
Sure.
do you get those numbers?
Yeah, those numbers are from the documents they've already put out on the tunnel. Some of them are from the California water fix iteration, because they haven't changed a whole lot between the first round and second round. But some of those are from there. Some of those are from other reports they put out since then. And then they said this week how much water they predict to be using that would be passing through the Delta Tunnel, which was that, I think, 3,000 to 7,500 CFS figure. And then the truck trips we had researched, and that's on our website, actually, on Sierra Club's website.
So I would highly advise that this valley fever thing is just kind of really scaring me. I don't know about you guys. I'm sure it's scaring you guys, but I think when we speak in the MET meetings or the MWD meetings, like, we should definitely bring this up as another concern of like how valley fever is spread and why the Delta Tunnel can highly increase the risks of dangerous valley fever cases. And I think we should also lobby our lawmakers to pass legislation that will help farmers and construction workers be safer from these kinds of things.
All good ideas. Yeah, absolutely. I think that you're right. I think this should be one of our talking points in our arsenal now when we talk about the Delta Tunnel. We also have the HABs, or harmful algal blooms, information that we know. So those are multiple risks to human health. And then, of course, the air pollution and everything that causes. It's a lot of risks to human and animal health from Delta Tunnel.
I wonder when will be the main vote on whether or not the Delta Tunnel for sure continues. Do we not know yet?
So there's a couple more votes. We said that the draft EIR is coming out this May. And at first we heard that the vote on that would be in September. That's not the case. They're going to need a lot more time to process our comments because we will have many. So now we're hearing end of the year or early 2023 for that vote. That's in a response to the public comment or the draft EIR. So what that means is we've got the draft EIR or environmental impact report coming out in May, June. We get 90 days. We heard maybe 45 and that we would fight for 2 months or 90 days, but we hear now it's going to be 90 days. So we'll have 90 days to get that comment. So that would actually be around September. It's when they would close that comment period. And then DWR, Department of Water Resources, they're going to read all of our comments and then write a response to it or include that feedback into the final EIR, which would then come out in early 2023, late 2022. I've heard up to mid 2023. I don't think they really know yet. It's going to still, it'll depend on how many comments, but we're going to make sure they've got a lot of them. Once that public.
So the EIR thing, was that for the affidavits that we did?
That's the thing that, yeah, we're going to be collecting the affidavits for the EIR. Let's talk about that later because we are being recorded right now. So the public draft, sorry, not draft, the public EIR will then be released sometime in 2023. And then all of the south of Delta water contractors, so Metropolitan, Santa Clara Valley, and a lot of other water districts south of the Delta will then vote after they allegedly read it on if they want to participate after they read the report and see how damaging it is to the environment and people. Then they have to decide, okay, is this something we want to keep pushing forward anyway? So they have that vote, and that's when we're going to make sure they know how we feel about it. And there'll be that vote. If enough of them vote yes, that they want to continue funding it. I remember Metropolitan would fund 65% of the tunnel, which is why we focus on them so heavily. At that point, if they say, yes, we want to keep funding it, then construction vote would be in 2024. That's the last big vote. So we've got
basically you're saying these big votes may not happen till next year. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So it's not going to happen this year.
No.
And the tunnel's not being built as we're speaking, is it?
No. Right now they're working on that EIR, the environmental impact report. And then from there it would be, well, and they're also fundraising and permitting and planning and stuff. And then after the EIR, they would vote to fund the permitting that they need. And then after that, they would vote to fund construction. If permitting takes longer, maybe the construction vote would be later as well. But right now it's predicted 2024.
Wow.
Yeah. So we still have some time. Nancy wanted to know who decides the funding vote. So the votes are going to, they're called South of Delta water contractors or state water contractors, which is essentially all of the water districts that use water from the state water project, which is like the system of water coming out of the Delta. So the Delta is the region, and that's my background, that's the Delta. And then the state water project and the Central Valley project both take the water out of there and channel the water to different water agencies or systems. Central Valley project is federal, and state water project is a California state system. So any of the districts that use state water project water, they're going to vote on if they want to fund this project to keep taking more water from that. I think there's 19 of them, and the Metropolitan Water District has 38 member agencies. So they're the water wholesaler that has 38 retail water districts within them, which is why they're so huge. And they cover Ventura County down to San Diego, all along the coast, and then over to San Bernardino and Riverside. So they're essentially all deciding if they want to fund it. And then it's a project that's led by the Department of Water Resources, but it's actually built by their construction authority, Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority, which is part of DWR in a way. And then, yes, so the water agencies would vote for the tunnel. And those are the folks that we target. That's why we're always commenting to them, because they're the ones who are going to be making that decision and they need to know how much we hate it. Yeah.
Maybe we should encourage other organizations to call in as well and not just us, because it always seems like it's just us that's against it.
Yeah, there are other folks who do. There are folks who call in for the really big votes. There will be other folks calling in on Tuesday to talk about the water rate. We're the ones who are kind of the most consistent at every little thing. A lot of nonprofits just don't have the capacity to cover so many projects. And then with tribes, they can do what we do, but they also have a separate forum for collecting their comments and opportunities to talk through an AB 52. It's a legislation specifically meant for tribes. So they've got other ways to communicate as well.
Is there any way that in this election in 2022 that Californians can vote for people in the MET or the MWD?
Yes. So MET is made up of 38 member agencies. Those water boards, everyone but Los Angeles. Well, I'll start with Los Angeles. Los Angeles Water Board. The delegates from Los Angeles to Metropolitan's Water Board are all appointed by the mayor. For the most part, they're pretty cool anyway. But then the rest of Metropolitan's board members, they're all elected to their water boards. And then from there, those water boards pick however many delegates they're allotted, which depends on property value, actually, which is not great. But they choose their water board members and then send them there. So while there's no election for like Metropolitan Water Board, there are elections within the home districts for those water boards. And a lot of them are up for election this year. Typically it's 2 years, 4 years, kind of depends on the water district. And that's within MET, but then for the rest of the water districts, some of them might be appointed, but most of them are elected. So yeah, it just depends on who's up for election this year. And because we're a nonprofit C3, we can't tell you, for example, to vote out most of MODOC, aka Municipal Water District of Orange County, how most of them should not be there. We can't tell you that. But if you wanted to Google individual members of MODOC or MET or any water district and see how they vote, or maybe Google them and see if their names have been in the paper in the last year or with these things, or even ask me about what kinds of comments they've made, then you could look at them and say, are these people we want to vote for or not? Sierra Club does have an electoral committee, which means you could join them and interview anyone who's seeking an endorsement from the committee. If they're not seeking an endorsement, that might tell you something if they don't even care to get an endorsement from an environmental organization. But there are a lot of them too. A lot of people, even some folks who don't vote for the environment, some of them still want the endorsement, and that's your opportunity to then interview them and ask them all kinds of questions. So that's one way you could talk to them directly. And I can put you in touch with people if you want to be part of the electoral committee. You should definitely do it locally. Keep to like your own region and city, because politics is local. But that's one way you can get involved.
I have a question. You said that since you're a 501c3, you can't go out and tell people like, oh, don't vote for these people in LA. But I'm confused because the last several elections, I've seen Sierra Club come out with a list of candidates or propositions who they strongly recommend and strongly do not recommend.
Yeah, that is the 501c4 branch. So a little bit of tax law. It is a breakdown. All of our Delta Tunnel work is C3, as in anyone who donates to that can write it off for taxes. For C4, you cannot write it off for taxes. So that means typically people donate less to C4, but it also means spending is really limited depending on the branch. So like Sierra Club California, I think you're only allowed to spend $50,000 a year on anything politics related. So no matter what subject, in all things environment, whether you're putting up a billboard, a flyer, or hiring someone to work on something, you're capped at $50,000. So you have to be really careful. And then there are other ways of doing that through national and different chapters, but it's all very careful. So that's why it's not something we tackle. There are other folks who can do that though. And then you can always speak to the electoral committee about got other creative ideas. So we just have to make sure that we're, staying within the law. Wes, you've got some creative ideas, but I don't know if that's something we'll be officially doing, but you go nuts. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I do. This is Ken. How are you?
Good. How are you, Ken?
Pretty good, thank you. I just wanted to remind, was it Sydney? This questions on who votes for this canal, or the tunnel as it's canal called. But I've got it in my notes here. I was trying to find it right now. Back in '82 of June, there was a vote statewide on what was called the peripheral canal at that time, and it was voted down almost 3-2, a little better than 3-2 as far as the no vote went. And so, the people of California, at least at that time, did express themselves as to whether they thought it was needed or not. And of course, DWP is just bowling right ahead because they want it. And
yeah, Ken,
everybody should keep that in mind. This is a thing for DWP and not many else.
So I'm trying to understand it. The sound is a little bit.
Sure, I'll summarize. So yeah, in 1982, the folks or the peripheral canal, which is what the iteration of this project was. So remember the Delta Tunnel, or right now it's the Delta Conveyance project. It has also been called the Delta Tunnel, the California Water Fix, the Twin Tunnels, the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, and peripheral canal. All of those are the exact same thing, just slightly, different modifications. But yeah, in 1982, it was a vote to the folks of California. It was a public referendum vote and overwhelmingly got shot down. The people of California do not want this thing. They don't want it back then. They don't want it now. But, that's why it is the way it is now, because they know that people wouldn't vote for this thing. So they do it through water agencies because people don't follow water agencies. People barely read the news anymore. So when people don't follow water agencies, that's how these things kind of go under the radar and they get passed.
I wonder how we can try to get the word out to get people to follow water agencies.
Well, doing what we're doing. And yeah, Ken, that is one of the talking points that we have definitely found is most helpful, especially if we're talking to kind of more conservative board members and libertarian board members. Nobody likes the fact that our vote was taken away from us, no matter what side you're on politically. Everyone can kind of agree that people should have had the right to vote on this, that it's not fair that they're taking that away. So it is something to remind people that they're taking the vote from the people, and it's our tax money, but it's water agencies who ultimately get to make these decisions, and water agencies where, those board members may have had hefty donations and a lot of other things going on. It is something to think about.
There's another issue, perhaps to drive a wedge in this agreement, that the San Diego County Water Authority is pretty concerned about getting charged too much from bringing this water through the metropolitan district.
Yeah, the transportation fees. So they just won their court case in September about, it doesn't cover everything, but about transportation fees that that was because they're furthest away, because they're by the border, they are saying, hey, we have to pay for the water to get all the way to us. I don't think I should read the outcome, but I don't think that it completely takes it away, but is now one of the factors that they have to configure for trying to decide how we're paying for water. And that's probably one of the reasons why the water rate has gone up so dramatically to 8%, an 8% increase in 2023, an 8% increase in 2024, because transportation fees are now something that they can't really use to factor into paying for water. In December, there were a lot of arguments on the water board met about, okay, well, how do we pay for conservation funding? Because with the water rate, you know, you're paying for the water you use. With transportation fees, you're paying for it to go further away. But with the conservation projects, we build them now, and then it conserves water, and we don't see the new water source for a good 10, 20 years from that. So do we pay up front, and how do we pay for it up front? And then if we're conserving water and taking less, are water rates the way to pay for anything? And that is one of the bigger, broader discussions that they're having overall about how should they be paying for water? Should they reevaluate their business model? Because, you know, when we need people to conserve, then they're effectively saying, hey, don't use the product we're selling you, but we do have a $2 billion a year budget and we do need money. So it's something they're thinking about. One thing I've suggested to them, and people on both sides of the argument, we can kind of all agree, and some of them have already suggested to it. It's not like a business genius. And it's not something I came up with myself, but a lot of folks have said, well, Metropolitan funds conservation projects for some member agencies. Why not do it for Met itself? So do their own conservation projects, so then they can have the money coming in. And the regional recycled water project, they're sharing that with LA Sanitation. So I'm not sure who gets the ownership of the water and how they'll charge on that, but they're thinking that rather than kind of giving grants to so many member agencies, maybe they need to do more of their own conservation projects to think about their business model, because it is getting expensive and we're trying to conserve and also serve underserved communities. And Nancy, hold on, Nancy had a question or a comment in the chat about how in her experience, the final EIR can dismiss a lot of the comments without further argument. That's absolutely true. We've definitely seen that before, that we'll make a lot of comments, really well thought out comments by our expert scientists, and then they're not even addressed in the EIR and things just keep happening anyway. It's beyond frustrating. And I think if Deirdre was here, she would tell you exactly that. That's happened to her quite a bit. And that's one of those red tape bureaucratic things.
So is it actually a good thing that this lawsuit was won? Was it San Diego that won the lawsuit?
Yeah, I think for the people of San Diego are really, now it sets precedent for anywhere where people are getting water shipped far, far away. It's going to be cheaper for you, for other people down.
So basically you're saying San Diego filed a lawsuit to try to acknowledge this, and they won. Is that what you meant?
San Diego has been filing lawsuits against Metropolitan for 20 or 30 years. And yeah, this one they won. I don't know the outcome of every lawsuit they've had, because water is very expensive for them and they don't have a lot of local sources of water. They are one of the ocean desalination. They have ocean desalination plants that we don't really fight too hard because they just have no other sources of water. And then they also are getting water from, or maybe they're trying to, I'm not sure if they've succeeded yet, water from their neighboring.
I strongly believe that if cities implement a lot of rain catchment systems on a massive scale, we could collect a lot of water in the little rain that we get, that when it rains, it pours.
It would definitely help, but there's not a lot of water that falls in San Diego. You got to keep thinking on.
Well, it's supposed to rain on Friday, so I mean, every time, like from what I've seen, almost every time it rains, it pours. So it seems like a lot. Like just
get your cisterns out for sure.
But I think we need it on a massive scale. I mean, I don't know like how. I don't know how much of San Diego harvests rainwater, but I know there's some programs in LA that do that, which is great. I don't know about San Diego.
Yeah,
So,
LA does get more rainwater than San Diego, but I mean, you're not wrong. Everywhere could use more rain catchment. I think that they just look at it as paying for those systems versus how much they get out of the sky. I don't know. We still have a ways to go for San Diego.
kind of
Karen,
discouraged.
go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, I was going to say that what we really need in throughout California really is just cities to begin and counties to begin to look at building codes that mandate collection of gray water and of rainwater, and you'd have to start that with new construction where it would be much easier to do, but you might ultimately get to retrofit. I mean, it's reminding me because I'm real involved with. I live in Sacramento with issues of electrification of buildings, get away from fossil fuels, and we're now working on how to put together a retrofit ordinance at the time frame. And interestingly, in Sacramento, in order to get the support of the local union of plumbers and pipe fitters, the electrification folks, Sacramento for gray water, because that would replace the work that plumbers and pipe fitters are losing on gas lines. And that, that may be a kind of trade-off to look at in other places, but would also get to the other issue of getting, being able to get much more of your water locally, which I think is going to become more and more critical because there's going to be less water to transport on one end. There are also going to be an increase in natural disasters, which have the ability to significantly disrupt the transport of water. And then the other thing I was thinking about in the distance, just even from LA to San Diego, and the whole issue of water evaporation, which is going to keep increasing, which is going to make the money that if it gets spent on the tunnel less and less effective, because that 40 miles are going to be covered with the new construction, but the rest of it is going to be flowing as human-made canals.
I think you're exactly right, Karen. Yeah, that's stuff that Sierra Club is working on as part of the pipe fitters and the building electrification. It's all hand in hand. I think you're exactly right. If we're already retrofitting for one, make it a partner project, do it all together. I think that's a perfect solution.
Yeah, and you guys are doing really good work on electrification. Matt, somebody is like an expert on doing that.
Yeah. That's a handful of Sierra Club California folks and a lot of the national team in LA too. Great work. Yeah. Cool. Other questions, comments? And Wes said something about wearing masks in valley fever areas. I mean, yeah, it definitely, I would say, especially in the Central Valley, wear a mask if you're working outside, not just because of valley fever, but the particulate matter in Central Valley is brutal. The air it's rough. And anytime there's a fire, the smoke settles in the Central Valley. Plus you've got heavy duty pesticides. When I lived there, I would just wear a mask walking around 10 months out of the year. It's hard to breathe. So
what about in Lemon Grove where we are?
I I don't think valley fever, well, like we saw on the map, it's not a huge incidence where you are. But anywhere in the Southwest, yeah. With climate change, probably most of the West. It's there, it exists. And remember, about 50% of people will never get symptoms, won't need to even see a doctor. So I think that's something you can do. And then just be mindful that if you're getting those symptoms, sure, check for COVID, check for the flu. But if those are coming back negative and you're still feeling sick, couldn't hurt to check for valley fever.
Okay. I'm just kind of concerned because my dad works in the yard a lot, so
Mhm. Yeah.
I think in regards to pesticides, that's also why we need to stop pesticides too, is because pesticides make people sick
Yep.
and harm our bees.
Yep. Yep, and that's part of the whole need to transition to a healthier ways of farming, because another part of the issue is the giant agribusiness pesticide monocrops that ends up needing more water than if you have healthy soil, which is, moving back to agroecology and some of the more traditional, composting and all of that, because that soil holds water much better.
Yeah, and if the soil wasn't so dry, we wouldn't see the dust and the airborne valley fever quite so much. That if the dust wasn't blowing as much, neither would those spores be. You're right. If we had permaculture, if we had healthier soils, it would be less of a problem. It's all related. At the end of the day, all of these systems are related.
Yeah, and we sort of, in terms of the climate crisis, we need to be addressing all of them. And I just finished reading the summary of the IPCC, the latest report, and it's very scary. I mean, we are really in the last window of possibility of being able to stay at 1.5 or below.
What is the IPCC? What is that? International.
It's the international climate report it's been an ongoing process with updates of it. I'm not sure what the spacing is of them, but this is a year that a series of updates were due. When the first one came out at the time of the COP, and now this is the next group of scientists, and then there'll be more.
You know what else too is concerning? So given the fact that a lot of the world is focused on the Russia-Ukraine crisis, which I think it's great that the world is focused on that and is cracking down, but given the fact that this man-made humanitarian crisis in Ukraine is being put on by Putin, I really fear that this is going to distract a lot of world leaders from the other issues we're facing now, like climate change and COVID-19. And I don't know, like, of course, I think we should keep being focused on the Ukraine crisis and, other potential humanitarian crises that could occur. But yeah, I just worry that it's, this is a big distraction from like urgent issues like climate change too.
They're also really interconnected, because part of the issue is the whole the pipeline stuff, and Europe getting so much of its fossil fuels from Russia, and now it can't. So I was reading something online today that Youth for Fridays for Climate, they're calling for a major peace demonstration, climate strike combined on March 6th.
Wow.
Because part of what has historically driven major wars, and it is driving this one, is fossil fuels, and who has them and produces them, and who needs them and doesn't produce them or can't produce enough because of the geology. And the flip of that is the more that countries are able to go to more localized green energy, that one cause of war will have gone away. I mean, I've always believed, and I've seen a lot of other people have said, the Iraq War, which was blamed on the alleged weapons of mass destruction, was really a grab for Iraq's oil resources. And,
Oh.
and just
So
on and on.
Is there actually a rally on March 6th?
Hold on. Carlin has his hand up. He's had it up for a little bit.
Yeah, one of the things that I think that we really need to publicize is that if the tunnel is even started, the Diablo winds are going to blow valley fever into the whole Bay Area. And that is frigging scary.
Oh.
That's going to be worse than COVID, because the symptoms are the same, and you're going to have the whole Bay Area inundated with valley fever if you have that disruption in the Delta. And I think that's something that we need to publicize.
That's a good talking point. You know what? I think I'll add a fact sheet on all of this too, and we can start.
That does sound scary, if I understood right.
I mean, I live in San Jose, and I certainly don't want to see valley fever coming down on the Diablo winds every September.
Yeah, we don't want to see it anywhere, but a lot of people live in the Bay Area. Absolutely.
So what is the Diablo winds and which way do they blow?
They blow down from the Central Valley to the Bay Area.
So you're saying that the Diablo winds are going to they're gonna travel the valley fever from the central all the way up to the Bay Area. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. The Diablo winds basically start in the Sierra and come down through the Delta, because that's where the opening is in the mountains, so that you have mountains on both sides of mountains on both sides of the Delta that funnel the Diablo winds through the Bay Area. And those are and they're big winds. You're talking 40-50 mile an hour gusts. So that and you're gonna be having, you already get air quality problems with the Diablo winds, and you throw construction in the Delta on top of that, you're gonna kill millions of people.
Oh God.
Yeah, that's a really significant point. And then there's also in the Delta area, so much of it is an environmental justice area, and those residents are gonna have their exposure way upped, and with poverty, there's lack of medical care, so they're not even gonna get diagnosis until they're really sick, because our healthcare system's so broken.
I'm still trying to get it's hard for me to visualize the way that the valley
like the way we have Santa Ana winds in the south, it's just like that in the north, with their Diablo is their version.
Yep.
But like, I'm trying to get a visualization of which way it's going to blow. So is the Sierras east of the Delta or the Bay Area?
Yes.
So the Diablo winds is going to blow from the east, and so is the Delta like north or south of the Bay Area, or isn't it all in one?
South. It's a little bit south, And then, so it's gonna blow, it's blowing mostly west. There might be some curves in there, but it's generally blowing west to the Bay Area.
Because I would think that it would blow it from the Delta toward out to sea, not to the Bay Area, unless it blew west and then blew north. But
The Bay Area is essentially on the way to the sea. So, but I think that Carlin's right, that is a major concern, and a lot more people are going to be getting sick, and we're going to be thinking COVID, flu, allergies, and not really considering valley fever as much. And it's not comforting that that only 1 out of 5 tests are accurate, or something I said earlier, 5 tests are inaccurate. So that's frightening.
I think we should make a note tonight to mention these talking points in the future or upcoming public comments.
Yeah,
meeting, because
on Monday, you'll get a blast email from me about the talking points for Metropolitan, and all the talking points will be in there. So yeah, these will make their way in there too. You'll get all the talking points and all the information for when to call in on Tuesday.
what
or
time
send an
is
email.
the
The meeting will be at 12 o'clock on Tuesday, but you can send an email ahead of time if you can't call in.
I'll probably be able to call in.
I'll try to call, and I'm also going to send an email because I figure if somehow I can't get through or they stop taking calls, or then at least I'm covered to some degree.
I think that's a good idea, because I also notice sometimes they'll just unmute themselves and have a conversation as if it's an accident. So yeah, cover all your bases. Billy, you wanted to say something?
We're not gonna see it, the meeting. They're not gonna have it on Zoom or live
Oh
stream?
yeah, we can't watch it when it's at Metropolitan. No, there's nothing for us to look at in terms of people talking, but we can see their slideshow presentations. But during the public comment period, there's nothing to look at. Yeah.
I mean, we ain't gonna have a discussion on it live. All we can do is just call.
Yeah, all we can do is call, and then if they want to discuss what we said, they will. A lot of times they don't. So
What I'm
okay.
saying is, we can't see it on Zoom or on, they will show us, but they won't see us on Zoom. There won't be nothing on Zoom or live screen.
It is a Zoom, but nothing that we can see. For the public, we can only see their slideshows, but we can hear it. Like as if you call into a Zoom without the video cameras. So we can hear their conversation, but we call in through the phone line, then they turn it off and we can hear everything. But yeah, nothing to see.
Okay.
And then Ken wanted to know, what are the major topics coming up for the Metropolitan meeting? So they're working on their proposed budget. If you didn't hear that part, they're working on the budget from February to April. I think this is going to be their third budget workshop coming up. And our big focus is that Metropolitan's budget, or the water rate, is going to increase 8% in 2023 and another 8% in 2024. And 2% of that alone just goes to paying for the Delta tunnel. So they need to know we're not okay with that. And that's our major focus there.
Oh,
That's for Tuesday.
That's for Tuesday. Yeah.
okay.
Go ahead, Billy.
I'd like to let you know about I was about to send a letter to the editor by the Los Angeles Times, but unfortunately they said there's only a 60-day stipulation, so I have to wait until several days. So I sent it to letter editors to my hometown newspaper, both the East Bay Times and the San Leandro Times. Yeah.
Thanks, Billy. They said there's a 60-day wait for what? Since the last time you sent them something, or?
Yeah.
But they didn't even publish it last time in the LA Times, right?
No, they didn't publish it. Yeah, well, I didn't see it because
Do you want to forward me what they said to you? 'Cause something doesn't sound right.
No, I was going to write the letter to the editors, but what I just saw was there was a stipulation that once you write the letter, you have to wait for 60 more days until they and when you write another letter, they will publish it. But if you write a letter to the editors, they won't publish it because it's not 60 days. That's what
Oh,
it
you're
was.
saying like if you send it to someone else,
No.
the exclusivity.
If you send it to the Los Angeles Times, you already did this. And now if you send another letter to them again, now, and I was going about to do it, but then I read that it was that once you read it, you have to wait for 60 days to write another letter.
Oh,
So it can publish it. They will publish it.
I think they mean 60 days between publishing something from you. Like they probably don't want to give you too much screen time essentially, but I think you can send as much as you want. They're not going to publish more than one article per person for every 60 days, if that makes sense. So go ahead and send it to them. And if they say we're not going to publish it, then send it somewhere else, because then you don't have to worry about exclusivity, which some of them take very seriously. So
Yes, but this is all about the Delta Tunnel.
mhm. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for that. Any other questions, comments?
How many affidavits have you received already?
Not many, and that's not something we're going to talk about while we're recording.
Oh.
You can message me offline about that. Any other questions or comments? Okay, folks. Well, this was a fun one. This will be on our website probably in the next 2 weeks. So thanks for the good conversation. It was a good one. Look out for an email from me about the public comments on Monday. It's not going to be like the regular email. I mean, I'll send you the regular emails too, but also it's going to be one of those big blasts that has like the official format and headings and all of that stuff. Oh, you're right, Wes. I'm sorry. We were going to do Volunteer Appreciation Day. I'm going to turn off the recording now. And